Hey Stevie, hey Abigail, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good, good. It's been quite the day, so I'm excited for this actually.
Yeah, congratulations. Wow. I'm really glad you could make some time.
I know,
What a day.
I was with the other day, I was like, oh, I just realized we scheduled this all on the same day. And I was like, you know what? We're gonna go for it. We're doing it.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's better to just do it all at once and then you get to take a break. Well, there aren't really no breaks in this space, but
That's true. I have to say though, like the last few weeks, like even though everyone's like, oh, it's a bear market, crypto, like finance, if you want to talk like the loft and trolls of that, it's been very busy though. If we're talking about like the art space of just like not only commercial things, of just like actual conversations happening, like the last 2 weeks with Marfa happening, with Source, um, it's just been nonstop. I feel like more busy than normal. But maybe
no,
that's just my perception.
no, I fully agree. It feels like August was like really quiet and then everyone's back. It's like really like back to school.
That's true. I'm definitely living in Europe. It's the no one works in August and then everything's go, go, go in September, October. So, love it.
Oh, the
Nice.
cycles, how they go. Hey Mario, how are you?
Hello. Well, I'm good. I always kind of struggle with joining these spaces. I don't know. It takes me like 3 attempts. But yeah, all good. Good to be here.
Well, you
It's
made it, so glad for
Yay.
that. Yay. I know, it's like sometimes you have to update your phone now. I don't know. We need a
Yeah,
better,
I don't know.
we
No,
need a
I
better
never
mousetrap.
really understand. So I'm sitting there and have the space open, and then it starts somewhere else, or I don't know. So I have not figured out the routine yet to get it right the first time.
no, I'm right there with you, as well as I think it's like one of the most difficult texts to like figure out still, even though all of us like living on Twitter should like know it by now, but I'm right there with you, Mario.
Thanks.
Well, I think all three of us are here if we want to get started.
Yeah, we can go ahead and get started. If everyone wouldn't mind tweeting about the space or retweeting some of the links that we have out just to bring some more folks in. I know we had quite a few people with reminders set. That would be great. I can start off with a bit of an intro and then hope that other folks roll in. I do see some friendly faces in the crowd, including our curator, Def Beef. Hey, Def Beef, how's it going? Really great to see you and some folks from the Feral File team as well, and Lone Wick, amazing. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started, and then we can roll. So, hello and welcome to the Source Talk series. My name is Elizabeth Sweet, and I'm the communications lead at Feral File. I'm so happy to be joined today by Steve Pikelny, Mario Klingemann, and Abigail Miller. Instructions for Defacement by Steve Pikelny and Appropriate Response by Mario Klingemann are exhibiting in Source, a non-commercial exhibition on Feral File featuring artworks made in the last several years which use software as a medium. The Source curators, Operator, Deafbeef, and Casey Reas, spent hours discussing generative works that have impacted them over the years. Here's an excerpt from the curator's statement. This is not an attempt at a survey exhibition or defining a new canon. This is simply a selection of work that the four of us are thinking about right now. For those of us in the middle of art, code, and blockchains for the last few years, there's been little to no time to pause and reflect on what has happened. Source is our attempt to do that collaboratively. Now, Anya, Catherine, and DJT from Operator, as well as Def Beef and Casey Reas, all wrote wonderfully thoughtful and rich descriptions of each of the 25 works exhibiting in Source, and I recommend you go check those out after the talk. And in just a moment, I'm going to pin two threads to to the chat. One is Anya's reflection on Mario's work, appropriate response, and the other is Def Beef's reflection on Steve's instructions for defacement. So I'm going to pin those to the chat in just a moment. But before we start, I just want to say thank you to Steve and Mario for joining us today. As we were saying before we started, it's a really busy time, and I'm just really glad that you all have made some time for this today. And I'm also thrilled that you're part of the Source Talk series and have agreed to exhibit your iconic works, truly, on Feral File. And I also want to give very special thanks to Abigail Miller, the Web3 lead at Avant Art, for moderating today of all days. I really appreciate you taking the time and effort to lead this conversation called Ordered Meaning. And so without further ado, I'll pass it over to Abigail. Thanks so much.
Hello, both. Well, I just wanted to take a moment. Like, this is Source, if for those in the audience who haven't had taken a moment to really read through the writing that has gone into the show, like, I highly recommend. There's been so much thought, as well as just like reflection, and kind of like some words that have really stuck out to me from the writing that Operator, Duffy, and Casey have put together is how they've kind of like brought together different components of poetry, sound, conceptual, and then installation art. And the two artists that we have here today, like Stevie and Mario, both of your works are, I think, really focused in on the conceptual and installation aspects. Mario's work was created, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mario, in 2021. I mean, 2020, sorry. That is like when you had the work installed, I believe, for the first time. And I wanted to start Appropriate Response. And then, Stevie, your work came out in 2022. So both of these works have seen quite like a different kind of like arc of generative art. And Mario, I wanted to start my first question with you. If you can take us back to August 29th, 2020, when Appropriate Response was like first revealed, or when you first installed the work.
Oh, so you want me to kind of reminisce? Yes, of course.
Yes.
So the work, of course, was revealed in 2020, but given the technology involved, I think I started with working on it in the beginning of 2020. I mean, as you can see, maybe from the little photo, there's a lot of hardware involved and custom built elements like that split flap display, and that took quite some time. So I think actually, if I remember correctly, I started with it December 2019. So, and I don't know, you want me to quickly explain very basically kind of how it works, because then I can go into the aspects about it maybe, because, well, let me, of course, so it involves AI, and back in 2019, AI was not, of course, at the state where it's now, where everything is so easy accessible, and we have these amazing large language models, and of course, Appropriate Response works with language. So this works with GPT-2, which is kind of a little child of, the predecessor of GPT-3 and now 4. But the benefit was that you could still train it yourself. So it was still possible to run this on your own machine, which is actually inside that kneeler that you see in front of the piece. So it's fully self-contained. And, let me say, actually, Appropriate Response is still my personal favorite work of mine, because I don't know. First of all, I could do everything that I wanted to, and I'm very thankful to my gallery on Chaos, who's helping me kind of financing something big like this, because that's always the problem, right? You have big ideas, and some of them are just kind of out of reach if you have to pay that stuff up front from your own pocket. And I always wanted to do something with text and letters, and with such an which is called a split flap display, which is something, well, I don't know, many listeners might not even remember it, because kind of they stopped making them, I don't know, like 20 years ago or 30 years ago. You had them in train stations and airports to display destinations and things. And, well, they are just wonderful devices because they are so physical, they make wonderful sounds, and I mean, you can even, I don't know, so it's just such a beautiful to see those words pass by, kind of blurring by, and suddenly they stop, and then you see kind of well, your destination in the usual case. So that was great that I could use that, and of course I wanted to include AI self-contained in an installation, which is also not that simple because yes, you need a model which can run on a machine that is not kind of huge, ideally, I don't know, and still affordable, and which also works in real time. And so yeah, I don't know, but using that model kind of worked. So well, I'm very, very interested in information because for me, kind of information everything boils down to information in the sense of information theory, kind of pioneered by Claude Shannon in the, was it 1920s? So it's that idea that everything is information and you can calculate with it. And even art in that sense is just passing of messages and encoded information. And so, and of course, with the advent of AI, you can now use information almost as clay, as a working material to transform it, to form it, and do things with it. And that's, I find, highly fascinating. And of course, very closely related with information is meaning, right? And it's and that's actually, I think, the title of this talk. And meaning is, of course, kind of very special because, well, we are all constantly looking for meaning, and then we also say that, well, the machine does not really know, well, have not really an idea of meaning. And so kind of experimenting in that kind of tangent field, that I found fascinating. I don't know how far I should go now, and if you want, if I should keep something for later questions, or if you just want me to ramble on. That's the question.
No, that is actually a perfect overview of appropriate response. And I have a few questions that will come in a moment, but I wanted to bring it to Stevie. If you can give us in your own words, just for the audience, kind of as a base level understanding of instructions for defacement.
Yeah, so I think the project sort of had its roots in some previous work that I did in 2021, where at the sort of like the height of the speculative mania that was happening with NFTs and generative art and all that, I released a project called Fake Internet Money, which was a generative artwork that replicated the iconography and the design of paper currency, and a big part of that was using the like a sort of rosette shape, which, as I did more research, I found that it was made by this cool machine called a geometric lathe, which, like, in a lot of ways felt like it was really interesting because it felt like it had ties to like early generative art, because the lathe is sort of like a spirograph where it's like if you put different gears in, you get different shapes. And it was just this like really cool design pattern that I had been meaning to play around with. So then a few months after that, I was speaking with Matt Jacobson, Numbers in Motion, who runs Plottables. And he was saying for that year, he wanted to do a live plotting project at Marfa. And he was looking at my work, and he actually thought like my work would fit in really well with what he was trying to do, because the way he envisioned it was, he wanted something where people can just kind of come in and do like a short plot, not something that takes like 3 hours, but something that might take closer to 2 or 3 minutes. And just looking at my work, he sort of thought like, oh, actually it would be really cool if maybe there's like a way you could do it on like some currency or something like that. And when he said that, I sort of knew immediately what I wanted to do in terms of just, playing around with the rosette shape and overlaying that on top of the dollar. And then I felt like it was also obvious that, if you're doing this on top of an image that already exists, then, there's a whole history of artists playing around with defacing currency. And I think there's a lot of obvious stuff in terms of drawing on top of George and giving him attributes and all that, which immediately made me think of, sort of like a tie-in to PFPs where it's like, okay, I can give him sunglasses and a cigarette and clown hair and all of that. And I think that was sort of the starting point where I had all these ideas of different ways that I could plot on top of the dollar. And then that summer, I was actually just doing a lot of research and reading a lot about conceptual art in the 60s and 70s. And in fact, there's one book in particular, Conceptual Art and the Politics of Publicity, that Simon Denny recommended to me, that I thought was just super interesting in terms of going through the process of the dematerialization of art and how documentation was sort of used as part of the process of sort of like elaborating on conceptual artwork, and how the documentation was ultimately like what was sold and like treated as the art object and all that. And then I also went to Mass MoCA and saw their huge Silhouette collection, which was really cool and inspiring. So then by the time I was actually ready to work on this, I think a lot of the conceptual art stuff that I'd been reading about and seeing over the summer definitely seeped in. And I think just like naturally, one of the first things that occurred to me was, in general, I'm kind of paranoid about a lot of this stuff. And so in general, I think it's always fun to sort of incorporate covering my ass from a legal standpoint into the artwork. So that's where I sort of came up with the idea of, like these are only instructions. Like I have nothing to do with it. I'm simply the artist, and I'm creating the instructions with this blockchain algorithm, and it's completely up to you, the collector and the viewer, to decide whether or not you want to deface the currency, and I have nothing to do with it. And then from there, I sort of saw that there was a really interesting tie-in in terms of basically presenting them as instructions that the viewer, the collector, is tasked with carrying out. And I think as Def Beef very articulately put it in his write-up of the project, it sort of highlights that dynamic. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much the 50,000 foot view. Oh yeah, I guess the other aspect of this project that is might be worth highlighting is just to sort of to tie in the actual live aspect of this. In Marfa last year, we rented a gallery space around the corner from the Art Blocks house, and we had, I think, like 4 or 5 pen plotters set up. And when you walk into the gallery, there's basically a line of people there, and at the end of the line, I'm standing at a table with a shirt and tie, and I have a big stack of legal disclaimer that you have to sign. And once you sign it, I also sign it, and then I give people a $1.00 rebate as a token of my gratitude for minting the project in the form of a nice crisp $1 bill. And as a minter of the project, they're entitled to 10 minutes of unsupervised pen plotting time, during which they could do whatever they want. If they choose to deface the currency, then that's totally on them. They signed a document that where they agreed to hold myself and Matt Jacobson of Plaudibles Harmless. And yeah, so I guess in a lot of ways, it sort of reminds me of QQL and the sort of like, you know, co-creation sense, but this also has the more obviously just like physical in-person element to it.
Yeah, I love it. And the main question for both of you that when reading through all of this, as well as just reading through like kind of I was revisiting both projects and just kind of doing my own research. The word semiotics, if for those who have like studied like art theory or art history, semiotics is kind of refers to the studies of signs and symbols and artworks. And both of your works, I feel like, are heavily influenced or comment on this. Like Stevie, your work takes honest like one of the most recognizable symbols for Americans, which is currency. And then Mario, your work takes both the symbolism of like 125 characters of like how many words can you or meanings can you put into 125 letters, as well as the like symbol of like the kneeling, like the it's the word pew, when you kneel down in front of the artwork. Those symbols played a very large role, I feel like, into the conception of both of your works. And I wanted to ask, did you guys both think about semiotics and what that means to you when constructing these works, or did it come kind of more naturally?
No, I think I don't think about kind of when I create my artworks, I usually do not over theorize what I'm doing. I mean, I have ideas I want to bring in, and of course they might bring their symbols with it, or kind of certain like, yeah, symbols or rituals just kind of lend themselves to, or they are the logical way to do it. But no, I never kind of approach my work from kind of trying to, I don't know, over art theorize what I'm doing. I mean, I prefer it if I build something which actually just happens to come out right or so. But yeah, so
yeah. Do you feel like then, like by having kind of like the viewer visitor interact with your work by like actually kneeling in front of it, like that ritual is kind of like almost asking them to put their opinions and meaning onto the work themselves?
Oh, I guess it just suggests. I mean, then, for example, yeah, the kneeling is, of course, has several functions in this work. First of all, of course, it's well, it first forces you. Like, the kneeling is, of course, the interface, right? So you kneel down, and that triggers the machine to produce for you a unique epigram, aphorism, and that gesture is, first of all, got very much out of fashion, right? We do not kneel that much anymore, like people maybe used to, I don't know, 100 years ago. So first, it forces you into almost like a performance, which brings you out of the moment, because I think that's important. Because there's this one thing when we're dealing with machines, is that we are kind of expecting instant reward, or kind of you press a button and you immediately get something for it. And I wanted to break that. And by kneeling and actually having to wait for kind of your message to be delivered, I hope that people kind of value more kind of the information they will kind of be given. Because otherwise, I mean, we are surrounded by machines that try to force information onto us. Like, well, we are just one of those, right? Twitter is definitely super guilty of that, and that means kind of we do not value single pieces of information that much. We take them for granted. So yeah, so the kneeling was kind of the function of the kneeling is that you have to spend the moment only with this. And of course, then the kneeling is also kind of a very religious gesture. And of course, that is suggesting kind of maybe this kind of semi-religious, no, well, I mean, AI is becoming almost like a deity, right? So it has certain properties that we assign to deities. It is almighty, or it appears almighty. It is kind of mysterious in a way in its workings, and at the same time, it can help us a lot, or it can do a lot of harm. And so I felt kind of this association was also important.
I think it's actually really interesting, Mario, how I guess like when I watched the video, and you mentioned that the text was generated by GPT-2, the first thing that came to my mind was like, oh, it's almost like I'm like bowing down to my AI overlord. But then I realized that this project came out in 2021, and I feel like from sorry.
2020.
Oh, 2020. Yeah, even longer ago. So from like a sort of like symbolic standpoint, I feel like the project would definitely be received differently if it was released today, because this year is when a lot of these AI techniques really hit the mainstream, not just for art, but just for everyday life. So I feel like these days we're very much more in a bowing down to our AI overlords mindset than we were in 2020, when I guess that was more sort of like bleeding edge technology.
Yeah, I mean, and of course it was even at that time, kind of the clear path was that these models would just get more powerful. And yeah, I mean, there's always that problem working with technological art, that you can be sure that if you just waited a year or two, you could do it even much better. But then, then you wait 2 years, then there's even more. So at some point, you just have to say, okay, this is what I can do now, and let's try to make it in a way that it will hopefully age well. Or yeah, but yeah. So
Yeah,
exactly.
I loved how you also explained using ChatGPT 2 was like it was the first one to skip this uncanny valley, was like, I believe, kind of the exact quote you had, if I remember correctly from the video, when it talking about this work. And I think also that goes back to exactly what you're both talking about, of like the first time like we're bowing down to this. It's the first moment kind of in this history, like we couldn't discern it from a human to machine. And it is this, even though it's surpassing uncanny valley, it's still giving that feeling of like it's slightly off, because it's not for sure human, but you can't tell anymore. And it becomes like more mystical in my mind with that.
Hopefully, yes. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. But I find it really interesting that you chose those symbols of like religion, but you also talk about specifically like this word ritual. And I wanted to bring this question to you, Stevie, about like the ritual that goes into like your work, and kind of like ask you more about that meaning and how you structured it and came up with it.
Yeah, I think that I guess it was sort of funny because we did the show in Marfa, which, as many people here are aware, is in the absolute middle of nowhere. So we didn't really have access to the space when we were doing our planning. We just sort of had a vague idea of like, okay, we're going to have a bunch of pen plotters, and I really want people to sign this like fake but also real legal disclaimer. But like beyond that, we didn't really have any idea of how the event would go and like what exactly the flow of things would be. So when we got there, we kind of had to figure it out on the fly. And I guess it was interesting because given what I was like thinking before we got there, we sort of just worked through everything, and it kind of fell into place pretty naturally, which is that I think the way someone described it is that it's sort of like bureaucracy theater, in that the flow we ultimately agreed on, which I guess for me was sort of a ritual because I had to do this like hundreds of times by the end of the week was someone walks into the gallery, they scan a QR code which takes them to the website where they could read or they could mint the token, and we were working with a partner which was supposed to take credit card payment, but their system wasn't really working very well, which sort of added to the bureaucracy theater of just trying to just like troubleshooting and going through email. And then they mint the token, and I had a page where they could verify if they own the token, and I walked them through the legal disclaimer in full customer support mode, wearing my tie, which I usually don't wear ties, so that was a big deal for me. And we just like go through the legal disclaimer. I explain how by signing this, they're agreeing to hold us harmless in the event of any sort of legal ramifications that might come from defacing U.S. currency. I specifically pointed to the section of the disclaimer that pointed out the legal statute of around defacing currency and the potential legal ramifications, such as 6 months imprisonment in federal jail and potentially monetary fines, and had them sign their name on the document. I signed my name, and I presented them with the $1.00 rebate, at which point they wrote down the serial number on the document, and I directed them to a line that they could stand in to wait for a pen plotter. And then as they got to the end of the line, Matt also signed the document and set them up on a pen plotter. And at that point, they were able to do whatever they wanted with their 5 minutes or 10 minutes of unsupervised plotting time. And I think it was just really interesting to see this unfold over the course of a few days, where when we first started, there was definitely a lot of feeling it out of like how the process would go. But by the end of it, we definitely had a rhythm down, and it definitely did feel very sort of ritualistic and also very, very mechanistic. Like in a lot of ways, it felt like we kind of had our like assembly line of defacing currency, which I don't know. I think it's just like an interesting process, because at this point I've had my share of like playing around with like defacing currency. So, and for a while, I occasionally, one of my business cards is taking a dollar bill and cutting it in half and writing my contact info on it. So at this point, in a lot of ways, the destruction of small amounts of currency is pretty familiar to me. But I think I'm definitely an outlier, and I think a lot of people haven't had that experience. So for them, sort of coming into this space and going through the whole ritual sort of gave it, I guess, like an added importance. And I guess that's something I really tried to do, is to not, because I think for a lot of people, it's like if you're doing it for the first time, it feels like this weird thing, just like, oh, this is like illegal, and there's this piece of paper that almost has this like mystical value to it, and it's in everyone's pocket, and it's like constantly floating around, and it takes on this importance that's definitely like above a piece of paper. So I think in sort of designing that whole process, I really wanted to emphasize the sort of like legal and bureaucratic framework that the paper sat in. So by the time you went through the bureaucracy of minting the token and signing the contract and receiving the dollar and waiting in line and putting the dollar under the pen plotter and fastening the pen in, then now all of a sudden you're at this moment where you get to make this decision of, am I going to deface this piece of currency? And so I think it was interesting to kind of watch people go through that whole process that like kind of like finally led up to that moment where all they had to do was push a button, and then maybe change the pens out for other pens and then push the button again. And then, at the end of it, some of the dollars had instructions written on them, such as burn here or cut here. And I think that was the most fun part, is sort of watching people, undertake those instructions where they got to cut $1 in half for the first time or set $1 on fire for the first time.
Yeah, I think kind of another word that comes to mind, like when thinking about your word, is like agency and like authorship. And it almost with both of your works, when a viewer is like interacting with it so intimately, the artwork takes on a life of its own that you both as artists can't necessarily control, because it sits so intimately with the viewer and the person interacting with both of your artworks. And I wanted to ask you both, since the source is a show, kind of like bringing together works that have already been published, have already been created, how has that question of agency and who is responsible for the art changed over the course of the last couple of years for you both?
Well, of course, working with AI, there's always, that's kind of like, actually, it kind of got better, but yes, this question, when you start working with AI, who's the artist actually? It's, well, and of course, now we got into even the hotter waters of working with models you haven't even trained yourself, and then people say the AI is stealing. I do not meet a lot. I don't know, maybe with my pieces, people kind of feel that it's me doing the work. So I never had anybody come up to me saying like, oh, but yeah, the machine did it. Like maybe like the computer did it. But of course, there are still a few journalists asking the question, who's the artist now? God, my classic answer to this is, and actually I have to revise it now, is like, well, if you have to ask me, doesn't that actually answer itself? But actually now with the large language models, you could probably ask the machine and see what the answer is. But let's say the borders are getting blurrier between kind of who's the artist. In the end, I think the one who claims he is or she is is still the artist, and who devises the system, who puts all the parts together and kind of places the button for people to press. In this case, in this particular work, it's pretty clear that I devised it, and let's say the audience, while it makes the meaning, is kind of more like a conduit in between kind of like things. So kind of the plug you have to put in to make the information flow and actually kind of make meaning, because the machine just kind of produces information, and then by perceiving it, people kind of bring meaning to it within their own context, but they are not the artist, or they are not the agent. So, they press, their knees are pressing a button. So, yeah, does that answer it somewhat?
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think with generative art, essentially what the artist is doing is they're creating a system, and sometimes people fit into that system in some ways. So I think with your piece, like it's very performative. So at any given point in time, I guess, like depending on like where you draw the boundaries of the piece, you could say like, this is a performance. So whoever is kneeling at the altar is part of that performance. But at the same time, I think it's pretty clear that you're the artist, and you designed the system that the rest of everything fits into.
Yeah, speaking from a generative art point, in a way, the humans are kind of like one of the parameters in a way that define, well, maybe the the time which triggers kind of some internal random number generator at which triggers the machine to produce something. But yeah, that's kind of
like if someone was kneeling there and just totally just broke down weeping, and there was this whole audience of people there going like, wow, this is so powerful. I mean, like, I feel like that's part of the experience.
That happened, actually. Some people have wept in front of this piece. They got a message which totally related to them within their current situation, and somehow, yeah, they were moved. I like, I wasn't there when that happened, but I was told that happened several times. So kind of fascinated me too. I did not expect that reaction.
Stevie, do you feel like your work isn't a performance or an kind of aspect of performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think with this, I think it largely was a performance, and I think I think the again, someone like described it as bureaucracy theater, and that at the end of the day, like I knew that like the Texas Rangers weren't going to come like kick the door in and arrest me for drawing dicks on like $100 $1 bills. But I think just sort of in sort of like having the legal disclaimer for people to sign, it definitely highlighted elements of the experience that I wanted to highlight. So on my end, it absolutely was a performance to sort of create this overall experience, and I think also from the viewer or like the collector's standpoint, it's just like they interacted with it in a certain way, and I think in a lot of ways it would have been a very different experience if I was only doing this one at a time versus, I guess, sort of creating more of a spectacle of it where there were just dozens of people in the space at once. And yeah, I mean, I think also there were just like a few other points, just like if you read the depths of the legal documentation, there's some, I won't spoil it, but like there are some hints of just like other kind of like aspects of the experience that you could bring out through performance. So yeah, like I would definitely say that overall the experience of like the live minting event was a performance. But yeah, I think also just like on top of that, just even outside of the live minting event, just the fact that we have cheap available pen plotters, and a lot of people have them, and it is fairly easy to just kind of take the SVG output of one of my pieces and connect it to your AxiDraw and put $1 under it and deface it. Like in a lot of ways, like it is a performative act where it's, I don't know, like I do think it's interesting that like when you're talking about kind of like conceptual art, you sort of have this dematerialized art object, but it's only once you draw the dick on the dollar, or draw sunglasses or a mohawk over George Washington's face, that it actually becomes real, and you've sort of like performed this action that so I guess it like nominally sort of sits within a sort of like bureaucratic and legal apparatus.
Also, I love how both of these works, like, it goes to show how brilliant Elizabeth Sweet is for pairing you both too in this Twitter space, is how there's so many manual elements to both of your works. With Mario, like the what is the word of the machines? Like the clickers. I can't remember on the top of my head the English word right now.
The split flap display, or you mean the kneeler?
Not the kneelers, where the letters like flip.
That's
in
that's
the little
called a
machines.
split flap display. So yeah,
Flip
it's
flap
flaps
display.
that are split and they yeah. And it's actually, to be honest, it's a painful piece. The first version. I don't know if you want me to tell you about that, but
I
that's
would
the
love to
thing.
know.
When you start getting physical, that's it's so much. You have to deal with so many more potential issues than with like if you just purely digital. And in this piece particular, because there's like each of these single letter contains a motor, and that rotates these flaps, and then they kind of stop at a certain point. And so the first version of it, the thing is, there's not that many companies in the world that still make them, and so I found actually some company in China that made them, and well, they sent it, and somehow something about the controllers was not quite right. So what happened that occasionally either they just died, which was of course an issue, or they got berserk, and then they tried to turn this thing backwards, which is not possible. And then you imagine like kind of these card tricks where people take a deck of cards and then they go and yeah, and these things started happening. So this thing hangs on the wall and suddenly it starts spitting out parts of letters, which sounds beautiful, but it's horrible. And so actually we had then a second version made at a different company, which is much more reliable and so far hasn't acted up. But I don't know. But well, the Chinese one had the more beautiful sound. So that's the whole thing. Also, once you get a mechanical apparatus, I mean, all the little things it does become part of the experience. And of course, I have heard both versions, and I think, oh, the Chinese version kind of had a more softer sound when it flapped, more like the sea, and the other version is more stable and has a bit more like a clacking sound. So
I was gonna say those flip flap machines, that sound might be like one of the most best sounds. Like it's so
that sound is fantastic. I mean, the other one might also a good sound, but like if you have the direct comparison, which only I have, is yeah, but then there's the problem. Like this thing is traveling the world, and having some machine which just kind of fails at very regular intervals is simply not an option. And so that's so it couldn't be done because yeah. So so now this thing is really kind of, actually the current version is in Vietnam, and it's operating really nicely, because that's the thing. You send this thing out in the world, you start kind of this technical legacy, and kind of whenever it goes, you fear that the phone might ring and they say, oh, it stopped working. And so yeah, and of course with a computer you can remote in, but with a physical machine, then yeah, you might have to send somebody or try to remotely fix it. But yeah, so that's why you want to build something that you can kind of rely on. And yeah, so now I can.
Kind of with that, like a second question to that, based off of your comments, Mario, has anyone asked you to like update the ChatGPT model that's used in it? Like you said, you might get the call of like, oh, this manually needs to be fixed, but has anyone asked you like, would you consider putting ChatGPT 4 on it?
How dare you?
Exactly.
No. I mean, there's also there's a very good reason why I would not use it, because GPT-2 has the benefit that I can run it on this machine. Once you start including external third-party systems or services into your art, you can be sure that it will break within a few years, because they will turn it off, they will depreciate it, they might change the model under kind of in the background. It would have to rely on an internet connection, and there are all these variables. I mean, I had made, like in the early Flickr days when they had this beautiful API, I built a lot of pieces which were dealing in real time, getting photos and stuff. And well, they are all dead now because they at some point kind of changed the API or removed functions. So when you're trying to build something that is supposed to last, you should not use any APIs actually. I mean, except if it's for kind of a short-term performance or something which has only to work for a certain amount of time, definitely it's fun to do that. But anything else is you are constantly in danger. And of course, also you have an artwork which constantly bleeds money because you have to kind of pay for these APIs. So fortunately, nobody has asked me. So it's frozen in time. But the good thing about it is, I mean, yes, it probably would even create less nonsense because that's what it does. I mean, GPT-2 was kind of an early model, but at the same time, it kind of let's say the truth that it has learned, which is kind of because it was trained on epigrams, famous quotes, aphorism, kind of that truth doesn't really get upgraded a lot. So because that talks about kind of fundamental human experience, love, death, anything. So and that doesn't really change. So it doesn't really need to be updated. I mean, so only for style. So there can always be another version, but a software piece, no. I really like it's done, and it's not an app, right? An app can be updated, but an artwork, that's the thing. You say this is it now, and well, if it looks kind of aged very quickly, well, then that's my problem. But I cannot kind of sneak in and just upgrade its functionality.
Yeah, Stevie, is this something that you think about in your work as well?
I forgot the question.
No, more about like updating with the manual element of like drawing on a dollar bill or currency. Like you don't have, there's no update there, but like with the mints, like on chain and online, like do you ever think about like the like preservation of that, or if you ever want to revisit any of these like notions within instructions for defacement?
Yeah, no. I think with this project in particular, there was, I don't know, I guess this was definitely like one of those types of projects where in a lot of ways it was very maximalist, because there was the sort of like the rosette pattern, which was totally generative, and that was sort of its own thing. But the rest of the project was just like a generative composition of stuff. Like there's different phrases and symbols and accessories to plot on top of George and all of that. So I feel like when it came to coming up with ideas for all of those things, it was just anytime I had an idea, I threw it in the code. And yeah, I think just like by the time I released the project, I got most of the ideas out there, but after the project was released, I definitely had a few more ideas that in some ways I would like to, I don't know, maybe I'll do like a one-of-one instruction one day that incorporates all of the ideas that I never got into the original project. But I don't know, like I think aside from that, with this project in particular, it feels very like it does feel finished. And like maybe if like I don't know, like there have been times where it's like maybe I wanted to do a physical defacement in a specific way that where maybe I wanted these accessories and this phrase, and like I want a very specific thing that just didn't happen to come out of the minter. Then maybe I'll just run the algorithm and do a one-off, or just keep running until I get what I want. But yeah, I don't know. I'm like other than that, like I've never really had the desire to update this code in particular. But I think like one thing that, just kind of going back to something that Mario said about sort of if you're doing more dynamic work that kind of involves API calls, I guess it isn't really relevant to this project in particular, but I think that just thinking about using the blockchain as a medium, that's one of the things that really excites me, because when you, especially if you're doing something that's more solidity based, you, by writing a smart contract, you have the ability to interop with all these other contracts that are on the blockchain, and their APIs are fixed. They're not going anywhere. So I think that that really opens up a lot of potential for doing blockchain-based work that you can't really do in any other medium. So that's something that really excites me, but unfortunately doesn't have much to do with defacing currency.
Yeah, that's very, very exciting. Kind of as we're coming up to the last 5 minutes, I wanted to ask you both if you had any kind of like reflections on the whole exhibition, like in a wider context of what Source has meant to each of you, and if you wanted to comment on any of the other artists in the showcase.
Well, first of all, I think, I mean, I felt extremely flattered because, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but in a sense, my peers, other artists who are working in the same kind of field like I am, are kind of like the people whose opinion I respect the most, because I believe they have the best understanding of kind of what is involved in creating this if you're doing it yourself, and kind of maybe are even able to look deeper than kind of what the casual observer sees. So it was a big honor. It is a big honor to kind of got included in this. And I mean, also generally, I think it's really, I have never heard of such a kind of concept for an exhibition. So I found that kind of very innovative and about time. So yeah, this is a wonderful concept.
Yeah, no, I'm also just really excited to be part of this exhibition, because I think a lot of the artists that were included are some of my favorite artists, and that goes for the curators as well. So I think that it feels really good to be in such good company. But I'm just like looking over the projects that were chosen, and there are a lot of really awesome projects that if I had to pick one out to talk about would be difficult. So I'm gonna pick out the first one by Ana Lucia, Generations, where I went to the exhibition of this one in New York, and I think that was a really cool project to experience, because it really highlights the history of generative art, and I think she did a really good job of drawing the connection between the sort of like modern age of digital generative art and quilting. And it was really cool seeing some of the physical quilts that were there that were designed with the same patterns that underpin her algorithm. So I think it was just, I don't know, it was just like a really interesting experience. And I think that it's a lot of fun just to reflect on the history of generative art, and like the fact that it goes beyond just computers. And it definitely highlights the fact that like what you're doing is you're building a system, and that system can be undertaken by a computer, but could also be undertaken by humans or just unwilling participants in some way. And yeah, so I think that was just a really cool project amongst all of the other very cool projects on here.
If I wanted, do we still have a minute or?
No, go for it, Maria.
No, because yeah, of course I didn't mention. So I think my favorite one amongst them is Ross Goodwin's piece, One for the Road. It's, I mean, I've known that piece, of course, for a long time, and Ross has always been so far ahead of us in that field, working with text and AI, and it's actually one of those projects which I wish I had made myself, because yeah, it's just I love all the elements of it, of course, kind of the road movie kind of narrative, and yeah, so kind of the printer, the physical aspect, the camera. So yeah, so that is definitely a great choice, and totally wonderful piece.
I couldn't agree more. And I just wanted to also reiterate, like, the curation in the show is fantastic. And I think it's going to go down as quite as a moment. So hats off and hands off to everyone involved. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, as well as, again, shout out to Elizabeth for organizing this all. And yeah, thank you everyone. And thank you, Stevie and Mario, for your commentary, opening up about your work, and just taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me. It was really great. Thanks so much. Great questions.
Yes.
Thank you both. Have a good one.
Thank you all so much. And thank you, Mario and Stevie, for sharing your insight and reflections on your work, and Abigail for so expertly leading this conversation. It's really been so enlightening and so much fun. And I hope that everyone here enjoyed it as much as I did. So really, thank you. And as we mentioned a couple of times, there are some really, really beautiful reflections on each of the works in the source exhibition, written by Operator, Def Beef, and Casey Reas. So please do go check those out. And just to give a little bit of a sneak peek, or just to give a rundown of what we have coming up next for the Source Talk series, tomorrow we'll sit down with Ishka Velichkova and Zach Lieberman in a conversation called The Edges of Code, moderated by Alex Estrick. And then next week, plus Monday, October 9th, we're excited for 5 more talks with artists Lauren Lee McCarthy, Primavera Di Filippi, Sarah Friend, Jonas Lund, Maya Mann, Zebrin Verstig, Dada, Sasha Stiles, Sarah Zucker, Anna Lucia, Travis Smalley, and Finga Code. And then we're also grateful that source curators Anya Catherine and Deja T from Operator and Def Beef will be joining a few of the talks, along with other moderators Whitney Hart, Vinny Valenzuela, and Madeline Pierpont. And really, I just want to reiterate, this exhibition is, for me, really important and iconic. And I think that it's an incredible moment for us all to reflect, sort of to both keep up with what's going on and to look back. It's a really unique moment in the space, I think, for us all to do that and to sit down with each other and talk about work that's really meant a lot to us. So I just want to say thank you again to Mario, Stevie, and Abigail. This has been Ordered Meaning, a conversation that we will post later on our website. And I just want to thank you all again. So thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow for The Edges of Code with Ishka, Zach, and Alex Estrick. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thanks. All right, I'm going to end the talk now. Thanks, everyone.